Welcome to Research Renaissance, presented by the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Embark on a journey into the forefront of cutting-edge brain science as we feature insightful discussions with a diverse array of guests, from early career researchers pioneering groundbreaking science to influential voices in investment communities, policymaking, and research institutions. Together, we delve into neurological diseases, their causes, treatments, and the quest for cures. Join us in advancing our understanding of the brain and addressing its ailments. Welcome to Research Renaissance. I'm Deborah Westphal, your host and guide through the fascinating future of the brain. Joining me today is Dr. Dean Ornish, founder of the Preventative Medicine Research Institute. Dean is also a clinical professor of medicine at the University of California. Today, we will be discussing his work in understanding how lifestyle changes may significantly improve cognition in individuals with early dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. So welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Deborah. It's great to be here.
So let's just jump in. What is your approach to lifestyle medicine, and how is that different from what others would consider traditional medicine?
Sure. Well, for the last 48 years, I've been directing research. I'm known as the father of lifestyle medicine because all of the research has been showing how powerful simple changes in diet and lifestyle can be. You know, Deborah, we often think that advances in medicine have to be something really high-tech and expensive, a new drug, a new laser, a device, a surgical procedure. And I think our unique contribution has been to use these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. And we've used the same lifestyle intervention for all of our studies. It's basically a whole foods, plant-based diet, essentially a vegetarian diet, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products, low in fat, low in saturated fat, low in sugar and refined carbs, moderate exercise, both aerobic and strength training, meditation and yoga-based stress management techniques, and support groups, or to reduce it to its essence, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. And we found that these same lifestyle changes could not only help prevent, but often reverse the progression of many of the most common and costly chronic diseases. So we started with heart disease. And at the time, this was back in 1977, a long time ago when I was a medical student. And at that time, it was thought that once you had heart disease, the best you could do was to get worse more slowly, to slow down the rate at which you got worse, the way that people tend to view Alzheimer's disease today. And we found that if you make bigger changes in lifestyle than what people had recommended at the time, and you change several lifestyle factors at the same time, the four that we mentioned, that instead of getting worse and worse, most patients got better and better. Their arteries got less clogged over time. Their blood flow to their heart improved. Their chest pain or angina went away. Their cardiac events were reduced by 2.5-fold. And we published those findings in the Lancet and the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Circulation, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, New England Journal of Medicine, and so on. Then we repeated that study in a randomized trial, went to Boston to do my medical residency at the Mass General Hospital and fellowship at Harvard, moved to San Francisco and began the most definitive study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial. And that was the one that really convinced most people that you could actually get better and better instead of worse and worse. And we used quantitative arteriography to measure the amount of blockages in the arteries of the heart and cardiac PET scans to measure blood flow. You know, when we published our findings, I thought, that'll really change medical practice. And to some degree it did, but not nearly as much as I'd hoped. And I realized that it's not enough to have good science, you also have reimbursement. And so that began a dialogue with Medicare for 16 years. And they ultimately ended up creating a new benefit category to cover our program with its own Medicare billing code. And then 6 years ago, after COVID hit, so during that time, we were training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country, and it was working. We're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, better adherence and engagement. And then when COVID hit, a lot of the brick and mortar sites couldn't keep staying open, so we began doing it by Zoom. And if anything good came out of COVID, it was learning that it worked just as well when we did it by Zoom as when we did it in person. And that opened up a whole new world because before, a person had to live within driving distance of one of the hospitals or clinics we've trained, but now they can live anywhere in the world, really. And that helped reduce health disparities and health inequities because people who couldn't afford to take off work or get childcare or didn't have transportation can now do it from the comfort of their own home. So that's what we've been doing. We also then found these same lifestyle changes could slow, stop, and often reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer in a study we did with the chair of urology at UCSF, where I'm a professor, and the chair of urology at Sloan Kettering at the time. We found that these same lifestyle changes could do that. And if it's true for prostate cancer, it's likely true for breast cancer as well in many of its forms, and the less aggressive forms. We did a study with Craig Venter to say, help us understand some of the mechanisms. What happens to the genes? And it turns out that when you change your lifestyle in these ways, it actually changes your genes. In fact, turning on the genes that are protective and turning off the genes that are harmful. And my wife and I wrote a book called Undo It. And it puts forth this unifying theory, like, why is it that with all this interest in personalized medicine, that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different diseases? And the answer is that they're not as different as we once thought. They all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation or oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells that live in our gut, in telomeres and gene expression and angiogenesis and overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, immune function, and so on. And each of these mechanisms is turned on or turned off very quickly by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and social support we have. And so it helps them really radically simplify. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is the first quote in the Undo It book. It's attributed to Einstein. He said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So, it's eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And so it radically simplifies it. It's not like, here's your diabetes diet, here's your heart disease diet, here's your Alzheimer's diet. It's the same for all of them because they all share these underlying mechanisms and they can get turned on or turned off. Even a single meal can often make a difference. So we then found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months. A study we did with Craig Venter, who was one of the first to decode the human genome, and particularly downregulating or turning off the genes that affect these mechanisms that are common to all of these different diseases that we just talked about, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and so on. And then we did a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, the Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, which are the ends of our chromosomes that regulate aging. And they're sometimes compared to the plastic tips on the end of a shoelace that keep your shoelace from unraveling. They actually keep our DNA from unraveling. And over time, as the DNA duplicates, the telomeres tend to get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of all these different chronic diseases that we've been talking about, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, changes in your prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, Alzheimer's disease, go up as your telomeres get shorter. And Dr. Blackburn did some interesting studies with Alyssa Epple, where she found that women, for example, under chronic stress, their telomeres got shorter faster, or people ate junk food, or who were sedentary, or who were socially isolated. Their telomeres got shorter faster. So I thought, if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. So we did a study, Dr. Blackburn and me, and we found that that within just 3 months, the telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, went up by 30%. And over a 5-year period, we found they actually got longer in the intervention group, but shorter in the control group. So this was the first study showing that any intervention, in this case, these same lifestyle changes, could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this, the Lancet editors called it the first study showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging at a cellular level. And then last May, we published the first study showing that these same lifestyle changes could often stop or even reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease. Now, in some ways, that might be our most important work because, with heart disease or type 2 diabetes or other things, other conditions, other interventions have some benefit, but nothing really works for Alzheimer's. They've spent billions of dollars to develop drugs in the last 20 years. Only 3 have gotten FDA approval. 1 was taken off the market, so there are only 2 now, lecanemab and donanemab. And they just slow down the rate at which you get worse. So you get worse a little more slowly, and primarily in men, even though twice as many women as men get Alzheimer's. And they have terrible side effects like bleeding into your brain or brain swelling in over 20% of the people. And they're very expensive. With the infusion costs, it's around 50 grand per person. So, but the way that people talk about Alzheimer's reminded me so much about 47 years ago when I was doing the research on heart disease. Again, the best you can do is slow down the rate at which you get worse. And we know what's good for your heart is good for your brain, that they share a lot of these same biological mechanisms. So I thought, let's find out. Whatever we show, it'll be of interest. So we did a randomized trial, and we did it in collaboration with some of the top neurologists in the world, with Dr. Rudy Tanzi and Stephen Arnold and Doreen Rentz at Harvard and Mass General and the Brigham, Mia Kiva-Pelto at the Carroll Institute in Stockholm, people like Dr. Blackburn again doing the telomeres, Rob Knight looking at the microbiome, Doug Galasco, and other leading neurologists, and John Arts. And so what we found was that after just 20 weeks of the same lifestyle program, that 71% of the patients in our study who had early Alzheimer's were able to stop or reverse the progression of their disease, meaning that their cognition and function improved rather than getting worse. And a dose-response relationship, the more they change their lifestyle, the more likely they are to show improvement in cognition. People would say things like, I used to love reading books, and I had to stop reading books because I kept forgetting. I'd read a paragraph and I'd forget. I have to keep starting over. It would take me a month to read a book. Now I can remember, and I can read one in 2 or 3 days. Or I couldn't do my taxes, and now I can. Or couldn't watch a movie because I couldn't follow the plot. Now I can, and I feel like I'm me again. My sense of who I am. A former chief financial officer of a major company said, so much of who I am was defined by what I could do, and when I couldn't do it, I just felt, like, who am I now? And now I can do it again. So it's very meaningful doing this work. Not everybody gets better, but most people do. And, the best that the drugs do is just slow down the rate at which you get worse. But getting worse a little more slowly is still getting worse. So they eventually take everyone's hope away. They say, get your affairs in order. If there's anything you want to do it soon, because, you're only going to get worse. And, and then they take your car keys away because, don't go out by yourself. And so your whole world starts to shrink and you lose hope. And the suicide rate within a month after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's is 7 times higher because, again, you take people's hope away. So I love doing this work because we can give people new hope and new choices that they didn't have before. Now, it was only 20 weeks. We're looking at 40 weeks to see what happens over a longer period of time. But, unlike the drugs, which are, have bad side effects, are very expensive, and don't work that well, the lifestyle changes actually work even better at a fraction of the cost, and the only side effects are good ones. And the reason is that the drugs focus mainly on amyloid, and amyloid is a protein that kind of gunks up your brain. We found in our lifestyle intervention that it also reduced the amyloid. It was, in a sense, the amyloid was coming out of the brain, just like with the drugs. But we're not just changing one mechanism. We're changing, because it's a multiple lifestyle intervention, a multimodal intervention, we're affecting all these different mechanisms. And that's why I think if you only go for one mechanism, you might slow it down. But if you affect all the mechanisms, you can soften and often get improvement.
What is the main pushback that you get from this science?
Well, when I first started doing this work, the pushback was considerable because the idea that diet and lifestyle could reverse disease was considered heresy at the time. Over time, people began to believe it. I think most people now accept the findings are real. But now their question is, well, nobody will do it, And that can be self-fulfilling. My approach is, those are personal decisions. But, it's hard to quit smoking. Nicotine is as addictive as crack cocaine, but we don't tell people, oh, it's too hard, just smoke less. We say, yeah, it's hard, but you only really get the benefits if you quit, And so I don't tell people what to do. I've learned that even being more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. But I say, look, if you're willing to make bigger changes, the reason why we were the first to show that we could reverse all these different conditions is that it's hard. You have to make really big changes. It's the pound of cure, if you will, rather than the ounce of prevention. I don't like the word cure, but in terms of getting better, it takes a lot. Whether or not somebody wants to do that. And in all of our studies, we found there was this dose-response correlation between the degree of lifestyle change and the degree of improvement. But to get improvement, as opposed to getting worse more slowly, you had to make really big changes.
So tell me about those hard changes, because, especially for the wider public with access to good food or the cost of clean food, give me some idea of the harder part of this to make that change.
Well, it's not hard in the terms of expense. It's actually a cheaper way to eat. It's a third world diet. This is the way people eat who can't afford to eat all the junk food that we do. It's you need a pair of walking shoes, or you can go barefoot, I guess, for the walking. Yoga mat, although you don't really even need that. You can do it on a carpet. And spend more time with your friends and family. It's nothing in there. I designed it specifically because I didn't want this to be concierge medicine. That's why I spent 16 years to get Medicare to cover it. I wanted it to be available to as many people as we could. And that's why I've spent so much of my life doing these studies, because I think that part of the value of science is to redefine what's possible. And by doing so, we can, at this point, give millions of people new hope and new choices in the areas that matter most. My mom died of Alzheimer's. She was a genius. It was so devastating watching her brilliant mind decay. I have one of the genes for it, and so I'm at risk for it. But again, if you can reverse it in many cases, then it's probably works even better to help prevent it. And there are newer diagnostic technologies that are AI enhanced, that measuring someone's voice or looking at their retina, you can sometimes diagnose 10 years in advance if someone's likely to get Alzheimer's. But a lot of people say, why would I want to know if I'm likely to get this horrible disease if I can't do anything about it? But again, if we can often improve it, then it probably works even better to help prevent it. You probably don't have to make such big changes to prevent it as you do to reverse it. And the earlier you intervene, the more likely you are to show benefit. So that's what gets me out of bed every day, to be able to redefine what's possible in ways that use, randomized controlled trials, hard data, published in the leading peer-reviewed journals, working with the top investigators to give many people new hope and new choices that they didn't have before. And then with Medicare, to make it economically feasible for people to do it with the support. Or you can just read one of my books, the Undo It book that I co-authored with my wife, Ann. It's all in there for, $15.
Yeah. So this Medicare covering this, do you have to be diagnosed before they'll cover, or is this something that people can do in a preventive way?
No, they'll pay for it for people who have diagnosed heart disease. And it's 72 hours of training. So we meet twice a week, 4 hours at a time for 9 weeks. An hour of exercise, an hour of meditation, an hour of a support group, and an hour of a lecture. And then after we finish the 72 hours, people usually bond. I mean, the support group isn't just helping people stay on the diet. It's a powerful intervention in its own right. We create a sense of community, a place that feels safe, where people can talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives without fear that someone's going to, judge them or criticize them or abandon them or whatever. And so for many people, it's like the love more part of the group. Like, what is that about? They might have the most confusion or even apprehension about it, but it's invariably the most meaningful part, because we help create a real sense of community. 50 years ago, people had a neighborhood that they grew up in where they got to know their neighbors, or an extended family they saw regularly, or a church or synagogue or mosque or club or something they went to regularly, or a job that people had been at for 10 years or more. They got to know their coworkers. And now many people don't have any of those things. And the online community doesn't really provide that sense of intimacy, because, and a support, like when you grow up in a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people, they really know you. They know where you messed up. They know that time you got busted or you got admitted to the rehab or whatever, and that they know, and they know that and they're still there for you. There's just something really primal about being like, I see you, I see all of you, not just your Facebook profile. Whereas online, it looks like everybody has this perfect life but you, because people only post their good stuff. And so the ability to create online through our support groups virtually, I didn't really think it was going to work, but we learned after COVID that it worked just as well, that we can create that sense of community. And so 85%, 93% of the people who start our program finish all 72 hours of that, which is unheard of. I mean, to put that in context, 2/3 of people prescribed statins are not taking them just a few months later, and that's just taking a pill once a day, and they're a proven benefit in people with heart disease. And the answer is, why is that? It's because the statin doesn't make you feel better, but the lifestyle changes do. And most people, their angina or chest pain gets way better, or in many cases goes away completely. And they go, oh, okay, for someone who can't, because of their chest pain, they can't make love with their spouse or play with their kids or go back to work or, even walk across the street without getting chest pain. And now they're pain-free. They go, oh, okay, I get it. I like eating cheeseburgers, but not that much, because I like not having this pain even more. And so it's not about preventing something bad from happening years down the road that people don't want to think about. It's like, oh, in just a few weeks, my pain goes away. Yeah, I like eating cheeseburgers, but I like feeling this way so much better that I'm happy to give that up. It's not about fear of dying. It's about joy of living.
So how far are we from insurance companies being proactive with ensuring preventative health, such as the options that you're talking about?
Well, Medicare is covering it. Mutual of Omaha was one of the first to cover it. Aetna's covering it nationwide. Blue Shield of California and others were covering on a case-by-case basis. And we're showing that it's not only medically effective, but it's cost effective. We did a study with Mutual of Omaha, and they found that almost 80% of people who would have had a stent or bypass chose our lifestyle medicine program as a direct alternative, with their doctor's permission, and they saved almost $30,000 a patient in the first year. And then Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield was not only covering our program, but providing it in 26 sites in some of the more challenging parts of the country, like West Virginia, which has been number one in heart disease for many years, West Virginia, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and so on. They found that compared to a control group that was matched for, age and gender and disease severity, that they cut their costs in half in the first year, and by fourfold in the first year when they looked at their high cost users. So the fact that we can show that we can save money in the first year is a real motivator for many insurance companies. And a lot of large companies are self-insured, so those cost savings accrue directly to their bottom line. And I think with the new administration coming in, with Dr. Mehmet Oz being the new head of Medicare, I think we're going to see even more of that.
So have you looked at any studies, or if you've done any studies where it's if you start this kind of lifestyle early on in childhood, that it actually, what are the impacts? Because you talked about how, one meal can change, but, is there kind of findings for kind of the whole journey of life?
Well, the earlier you start, the less you have to change. So, and also, my kids have been eating healthy, when they were growing up, because you get a lot of your taste preferences by what you eat. And so when you grow up, you're eating certain foods, you tend to like them more. So they've been eating healthy foods since they were little. And also, I've learned even with kids, and maybe especially with kids, rather than telling them what to do, to say that, to bring them into the process. Mentioned earlier that even more than being healthy, most people want to feel free and in control. And as soon as I tell somebody, eat this and don't eat that, and do this and don't do that, they immediately want to do the opposite. It's just human nature. It goes back to the first dietary intervention, when God said, don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well. And that was God talking, So it's like, I'll teach them how to read labels and say, try to, if you're going to have a sweet treat, try to get it with, fewer than X amount of grams and so on. So by bringing them into the process and empowering them, rather than saying, don't eat this, because as soon as you tell somebody not to eat something or do something, they want to do it even more.
What is the correlation with superagers, given that that's kind of a new area of science that we're looking at this group of people that may have Alzheimer's or some sort of dementia, but not exhibiting the cognitive decline? Is there any relationship there with their diet and their lifestyle that you know of?
Yeah, I think partly is genetic and part of it is lifestyle for sure. For example, in our study, we found that there's a measure of amyloid. Remember, amyloid is that protein that kind of gunks up your brain. And the drugs work by, in effect, pulling amyloid out of the brain and going into the blood. And we found the same thing occurred with our lifestyle intervention, also in a dose response fashion. So not only was there a significant correlation between the degree of lifestyle change and the degree of improvement in cognition and function, but we also found that there was a dose response, statistically significant correlation between the degree of lifestyle change and the degree of change in this measure of amyloid called the A beta 42/40 ratio. So partly, yes, there's genetic component to that, but even if your genes are like, let's say you don't have, in the case of heart disease, you're not very efficient at metabolizing dietary saturated fat and cholesterol. So you're more likely to get heart disease if you eat a typical American diet. But if you eat a diet that's really low in saturated fat and cholesterol, then it doesn't really matter if you're not as efficient at getting rid of it because you're not eating that much in the first place. So your genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. And then, as I mentioned before, we found that we could actually turn on and turn off genes. There are proteins called sirtuins or methylation or histone and non-histone proteins that, in effect, act like a switch to turn on or turn off a gene. So if you can turn off a gene that causes inflammation, for example, then it's as though you change the gene functionally. And so we're learning now that the lifestyle changes can actually work by changing the gene expression, lengthening telomeres, changing the preponderance of different organisms in your microbiome, the 100 trillion cells in your gut. We found in the Alzheimer's study, we actually measured that, and we found that good organisms went up and bad organisms went down in the intervention group. So the more mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple lifestyle changes are so powerful and how quickly they can often occur.
So when you talked about reversing the disease, what is how does that work with the buildup of amyloid? And do we understand that mechanism and how that is reversing it? Or is there something else that's going on there?
Well, as I mentioned, I think part of the amyloid is one mechanism. It's the only mechanism that the drugs work on. But the lifestyle affects that and all these other mechanisms we've been talking about. And that's why I think the drugs slow it down a little bit. But if you change a lot of lifestyle factors at the same time, you can often stop or reverse its progression because you're not just focusing on one mechanism, you're focusing on many of the ones that really make a difference. In simple terms, our bodies often have this remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized if we can simply stop causing the problem. And so it's not that there's something magical that these lifestyle changes provide you, although they are actually protective. Studies show that when you switch from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, you're actually getting a double benefit because you're not only lowering the risk from not eating all this meat, but you're also getting the plant-based diets are actually protective. So you're not only lowering the risk, but you're actually getting things that actually protect you: phytochemicals, bioflavonoids, carotenoids, retinols, isoflavones. There are literally thousands of substances in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and soy products that help to have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, anti-aging properties.
So if someone is having symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's and they go into their general practitioner doctor, do those doctors know to ask the question around diet and lifestyle? Or, is there a diagnosis issue there too, which, at the entry point of someone's journey?
Well, it's not just Alzheimer's. The more common, vascular dementia, involving the blood vessels is an equally, if not greater, cause of dementia as people get older. The clogging in your arteries doesn't just occur in your heart; it occurs throughout your body. That's why sexual function, people find that their erectile dysfunction is much greater when they have clogging of arteries in their heart because they're clogging of arteries in their sexual function, in their sexual organs. It's diffuse, or in your brain. And so you don't have to have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's to benefit from changing your lifestyle. But I think that most doctors, unfortunately, we're not trained to use drugs and surgery. We're trained to use drugs and surgery. We're not trained to do lifestyle or diet. I'm on the nutrition working group of the American College of Cardiology. We published a paper a few years ago that the average doctor in 4 years of medical school gets 4 hours per year of diet and nutrition training. The average cardiology fellow in 4 years of fellowship gets none. So, we're reimbursed to use drugs and surgery. We're trained to use drugs and surgery. So that's what we do. It's like that old Abraham Maslow quote, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see everything as a nail. So that's part of why I spent so many years to work with Medicare to get reimbursement for this, because I thought, we wanted it to be available to people. But also, if you change reimbursement, it ultimately changes medical practice and medical education. And I helped to create the field of lifestyle medicine. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine now offers board certification. They have over 10,000 members. It's growing exponentially. To me, it's the most exciting field of medicine today because it really shows how we can empower people to transform their lives.
So what are your thoughts on sleep and REM disorder and just the connection to our overall health?
Well, sleep is a subset of the stress less part of our program. Getting enough sleep is really important, especially with your brain, because your brain, in effect, detoxifies during times of sleep. So it's really important to get enough sleep. Ariana Huffington wrote a book about this when she was pushing herself and got so exhausted that she actually fell asleep and fell and cut open her head. And she realized that this is something that, in the workforce, people often like, oh, I only need 4 hours of sleep, and making kind of a macho thing, and yet realizing that we pay a price for that in our efficiency and our creativity and in our health.
Yeah, our modern world with technology and just the acceleration of just activities maybe actually increase our aging here. I don't know. But, talking about technology and stress, specifically around all the things that we do around computers and being connected all the time, is that a part of your program too? Is that you got to disconnect?
Well, you don't have to disconnect, but especially with kids, these our smartphones are programmed to give us these dopamine hits. They're continually my daughter, who knows more about, is actually, writing, doing research on the damaging effects of smartphones. That they're people get paid lots of money to find ways of sucking you in and grabbing your attention, and it's creating a whole generation of kids with ADD. That you just continually have to get this TikTok hit or this dopamine hit. So meditation, in many ways, is the antithesis of that. It's really about bringing your mind to one point, to focus your mind, to quiet down your mind, to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and to realize that's our natural state for the most part. So much of our culture, especially lately, teaches us that we get our health, we get our peace, we get our well-being, our sense of self from getting stuff from the outside of us. And once you set up that view of the world, however it turns out, you're generally going to feel bad because, if you say, oh, if only I had more blank, then I'd be happy, then I'd be healthy, then people would love me, and then I wouldn't feel so bad. And usually we fill in the blank, if only I had more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever. If only I had blank, then I'd be happy. Now, once you set up that view of the world, and the whole advertising industry is based on that concept, just, buy this Miller beer or whatever it is, then you'll be happy. Always in a commercial with lots of happy, laughing people. Once you set up that view of the world, until you get it, you're stressed. I hope I get it. It's really important. If somebody else gets it and you don't, then it feels really bad. And it feels like it reconfirms this idea that we live in a hostile, dog eat dog world, zero sum game. The more you get, the lesser is for me. And if you get it, it's great for a moment. It's like, I got it. Now I'm happy. But it doesn't really last for the most part. It's soon followed by either now what, it's never enough, or so what, big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting sense of meaning. And so people say, well, this didn't do it, maybe that would. And so the treadmill continues. So the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns and mullahs and whatever, the ancient spiritual teachers didn't develop these techniques like meditation and so on to unclog your arteries or get your blood pressure down or whatever. They're really powerful tools for transformation. And the way that I find that they're most powerful is that they can quiet down our mind. And then at the end of a meditation or a yoga class, when you're feeling more peaceful, to remind yourself, to literally remind yourself that you didn't get that peace from doing the meditation. It was already there. What the meditation helped to do was to stop disturbing what's already there. And that may sound like semantic parsing of words, but the implications are really quite profound, because if it's out there, I got to get something from out there to be happy and healthy, then everybody who has what I think I need has power over me in the most primal ways. But if it's me, if it's like I need to stop disturbing that my health and my well-being for the most part are already there, this question shifts from how can I get what I need to be happy and healthy to how can I stop disturbing the inner peace that's already there. That's very empowering because I can do something about that, not to blame myself, but to empower myself. So then I can say, what am I doing that's disturbing my own inner peace? And to stop doing that. The other thing that happens when you're in a deep state of meditation is it's so much more than stress management. It can really give us access to our own inner wisdom. There's what some religious traditions call a still small voice within that speaks very clearly but very quietly, and it can be drowned out by the chatter of everyday life. But at the end of a meditation, when things are more quiet, I've learned to be able to access that. We all have that. Just say, to your inner self, say hello, and it'll say hello. You say, what am I not paying attention to that I need to? And it'll tell me. I mean, all of the studies that I've directed over the last almost 50 years, 47 years, were thought impossible at the time. But it came from listening to that little voice and then going back to the literature and saying, is there a plausible reason why this might be true? And then designing studies, randomized trials to see if it's true. But I've really learned to trust that voice. And to me, that's part of the best value of meditation. It's so much more than stress management.
When you look into the future, say the next 5 or 10 years, what is your greatest hope, or what do you hope to see for the future?
Well, I think there's a convergence of forces that make this idea of lifestyle medicine the right idea at the right time. The limitations of drugs and surgery are becoming clear, like we talked about with Alzheimer's, but the power of lifestyle changes is becoming more well documented. The costs are unsustainable. We spent almost $4 trillion last year on healthcare in this country. 86% of that is for treating chronic diseases that can largely be prevented or often reversed through lifestyle changes at a fraction of the cost with only good side effects. And I think there's a growing awareness of the science, supporting these things. So I really believe in my heart of hearts that we're going to see more attention given to the power of lifestyle medicine. We'll still, drugs and surgery can be life-saving in a crisis, but even then, we need to address what ultimately led to that problem in the first place. So I just want to say, to me, awareness is the first step in healing. Thank you for giving me the chance to raise awareness and share what we've learned. If people are interested in learning more about our work, just go to ornish.com, which also includes the Medicare covered program, or to our research website, which is pmri.org for Preventative Medicine Research Institute. So pmri.org or ornish.com. And again, I hope this has been useful. Thank you.
Dean, I've really appreciated your time today. I've learned a lot, and it's amazing work that you're doing and that you're dedicated to. So thank you very much for sharing your insights.
You too. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you for joining Research Renaissance. For more information and to stay updated, subscribe for more episodes and visit our website at tofflertrust.org. Feel free to call us if you have any thoughts, suggestions, or just want to find out more about the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Until we meet again, onward and upward.